Greetings, friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I invite you to review the battle map as of the morning of November 12th. It's Wednesday. Let's now sum up the past day. We'll discuss the two most active sections of the front. That's Huliaipole, which I mentioned yesterday. I said what I said, and a lot was said yesterday. You can watch the review for November 11th. And the second one, of course, is Pokrovsk. So let's start with Huliaipole. But first, please like the video, leave your comment, and subscribe to us. Let's go. So what do we have regarding Huliaipole? We have, in fact, an advance by the Russians, which is already marked on the deep state map as a red zone. This means that the enemy is now already fighting for Rivnopillia. The enemy is fighting for Solodke. In fact, yesterday, the Southern Defense Forces acknowledged it. They acknowledged that Ukrainian troops had withdrawn from the areas of active combat, specifically in this zone, essentially from Pavlivka along Novouspennivska and Nove. This was stated by the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, who said that the defense forces had withdrawn from 5 settlements. And here I immediately have exactly 5 questions for our official communication. Question number 1. Well, I think there are about 5 or maybe 4, but let's start with question number 1. Just yesterday, I covered this issue. 5 or 6 days ago, the Southern Defense Forces, in their official communications, denied it. They said that Deep State was basically spreading falsehoods, that there were no captured settlements, including those mentioned by Deep State, like Uspennivka, that everything was fine there and the defense was ongoing. And only after 5 days, suddenly the Defense Forces immediately withdraw from 5 settlements. So the first question is about communication and truthfulness. Question number 2. At the same time, and I mentioned this yesterday as well, the head of the Assault Troops Command, Colonel Manko, said that while here in Uspennivka, the Southern Defense Forces were denying that there was an enemy present, our assault troops were actually reporting that they were liberating Solodke and clearing Rivnopillia. So, the question arises, this information doesn't quite match up, does it? How can it be that the head of the assault troops says one thing while the official communication from the Southern Defense Forces says something else? That's question number 2. Now, point number 3, which is currently being voiced again by the spokesperson of the Southern Defense Forces, is that from 5 settlements, Ukrainian troops, he lists these 5 settlements, Novo-Uspennivske, Nove-Okhotniche-Uspennivka, and Novomykolaivka. Accordingly, he's talking about 5 settlements. So, question number 3 actually arises in this communication. Then why in the evening, when Commander-in-Chief Syrsky appears on the official information channels, does he mention 3 settlements? Explain to me how it is possible that in just one day there are different voices against the backdrop of 2 official statements. The spokesperson for the SBU says 5 settlements, and then the Commander-in-Chief comes out and says 3 settlements. Do you know what all this means? It all means that this is just an extraordinary mess. Obviously, what we're witnessing are the consequences of this false information being reported, which everyone is fighting against. Like fighting windmills, at least in statements, but in reality, both from our side and from the enemy's gang, the actual situation is different. The fourth question that arises in this situation is that after the defense forces lost Vuhledar, the enemy very quickly captured Velika Novosilka and, in fact, advanced into these areas. Now, in reality, they are flanking and even getting into the rear, not just the flank, but the rear of Huliaipole, creating a threat to Huliaipole, which I mentioned 3 months ago. That's the issue. This is about the issue of conveying truthful information because we have huge problems in this direction. There are huge problems with the construction of engineering and fortification structures because there was a very unfortunate situation near Velika Novosilka when, even if we look at the satellite image or the deep state maps, there is just one road here. A road that runs from Zolota Naiva along the Kashlahak River to Velika Novosilka. It was along this very road that the Russians were making their primary push toward Velika Novosilka. And you know what the absurdity is? It lies between 2 rivers. River number 1. Kashlahak River is number 2. And this narrow road, these locations, there's a question. How did the occupiers manage to slip through here? This means it wasn't mined. It means there simply weren't any positions set up where the occupiers could have been taken out like at a shooting range. Moreover, the occupiers broke through here not only at this spot, but also at Shakhtarske. They advanced quite rapidly, making a 7-kilometer push in just one day. And since then, these massive lines have stretched on. Problems I don't know. Perhaps there are other possible ways to describe or characterize what is happening in this direction, but the fact remains. We have reached a point where the situation on the Huliaipole front is truly dire and extremely complicated. I recently saw a comparison on one of the Telegram channels showing what the front line looked like here 2 months ago. No, actually 3 months ago on August 20th, and what it looks like now, plus 250 square kilometers. Analysts and OSINT researchers have repeatedly pointed out that this particular section, the junction of the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions, right where the three regions meet, is the most problematic part of the front. Now, this is being stated by the commander-in-chief himself, who says that the Oleksandrivka and Huliaipole directions are the most difficult. And not just that. Well, if everyone saw it, everyone understood why and what exactly is going on here. Who can explain what went wrong? Right now, there are some very critical, so to speak, assessments and comments. Of course, I will dispute the words of Bild journalist Osman and Röpke, who claims that our front has collapsed in this sector. I will also argue with the author of the Telegram channel Sniper Speaks, Stas Osman, who is Stanislav Bunyatov, who writes that the Zaporizhzhia direction expects a collapse on the right flank similar to what happened in Donbass after Avdiivka and Ocheretine. If we don't respond to the current halt the way we did in Sumy region, everything could end in tragedy. Honestly, as I read this statement now, I can't even find anything to argue with. The fact that he doesn't claim there's already a collapse, but a fact is a fact. In the past 3 months, the enemy has advanced 250 square kilometers here. And in terms of the ratio and correlation between the number of assaults the enemy carries out and the advances they make, this is undoubtedly the most successful direction for them, the most successful section of the front, not even Pokrovsk. But precisely this one is the most successful for the enemy. Moreover, there is information that now in Zaporizhzhia, the enemy is even bringing in Rubicon pilots. This information still needs to be verified, so to speak. But let's return to the thesis of the author of the popular military channel. The sniper says that we are facing a collapse if the situation is not stopped. Well, probably yes. If not, thank you. If the situation is not brought under control, then in another 2 to 3 months, there will be another 250 square kilometers of advance. Or what? The truth is, right now, it will be physically difficult for the enemy to advance to the open field. But what will be much easier for them is to bring the open field under fire control. And the logistical routes, the approaches to the open field, can also be brought under logistical disruption. Because, as you can see, the road that goes from the north to Huliaipole is a roadway that actually runs along the riverbed. This riverbed, which quite logically means that it lies in a lowland area, is a place where the land is lower than the surrounding terrain. In this lowland, the Hanchun River flows, and Huliaipole, in relation to Rivnopillia, for example, is situated lower. So this will be an influence from above downward. If the Russians take Rivnopillia, and as we can see now, both the red and gray zones are already reaching this area, and if they position their drone operators at this location, then you can imagine for yourself what fate awaits Huliaipole. This means cutting off one route and severing other routes as well. There's not even any point in talking about the east here, because right now there are battles raging in the area of Zelenie High, and the occupiers definitely still have their own considerations here regarding putting pressure on this section. But this could also involve the capture of Zanoha, which, by the way, is also on higher ground compared to Huliaipole. This further affects other locations beyond Huliaipole, essentially by cutting off logistical routes and trapping them in a kind of fire pocket. And as we can see, and as practice shows, unfortunately, the Russians are able to successfully implement this wherever their operators, drone operators that is, gain an advantage. And that's why this is the trend we're currently seeing in the Zaporizhzhia direction, particularly in the Huliaipole area. And to be honest, it's not encouraging. And what is most concerning is, from the perspective of analyzing the facts, well, obviously, let's put it this way. Let's assume, as we're told, supposedly, so as not to accuse anyone right now, but if on the same day the spokesperson says we've lost 5 villages and the commander-in-chief says 3 villages, a question arises. If the head of the assault troop says they've cleared villages that are west of the locations mentioned by the Southern Defense Forces and that there isn't even an enemy there, then a question arises. And a logical assumption arises that most likely there is some untruth here. And among other things, falsehood is part of what is happening in this situation. Now let's move on to the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration area, because this, of course, remains a priority section of the front for the enemy. Thesis number 1. There is good news. The good news is that, according to Deep State, as you can see on their map, they have marked an advance in the Suvorov area, but this is more about coloring in territory that was actually already occupied by our forces earlier. By our troops, in fact. What is happening now, I already described this yesterday in a general stream, is that we need to understand that there is an attempt to relieve the entire flank. The left flank of the defense of Myrnohrad, with an advance toward this river, the Kazeni Torets. Ideally, if we ever manage to do this, and right now our paratroopers are also working on it, including clearing such settlements as Rudinsky, which we are currently holding, Krasny Lyman, which needs to be cleared of the enemy, and Razin, together with Fedorivka and Novotoretske, then perhaps the possibility of further defensive scenarios in the area of the Myrnohrad-Pokrovsk agglomeration, with a gradual withdrawal specifically to Myrnohrad and taking up defensive positions in the north of Pokrovsk would be possible. In principle, I described this scenario in detail yesterday. There are opinions that it will be very difficult to accomplish with the set of troops we have here, but this is also, let's say, a theoretical scenario that could be successful for Ukraine if it is implemented. As of now, what is important to understand and discuss is Pokrovsk. Well, things are grim in the north, so those who say that there is no kind of control zone from the enemy, they are obviously not telling the truth. Because I think everyone has seen, or if you haven't, I'll show it now, this video, which looks like some kind of wild post-apocalypse, showing how the Russians are entering Pokrovsk from the south. Yesterday, I was even answering questions from colleagues who asked, isn't this AI? Didn't artificial intelligence make this video? No, unfortunately, it's not AI. Take a look at this video. When you watch footage like this, it really feels like something out of Mad Max or some kind of post-apocalypse. That's what people say when they see it. But these are scenes from the outskirts of Pokrovsk, where the enemy is able to enter quite freely and easily under the cover of fog, not afraid of being hit. And unfortunately, these are real shots. Of course, later, when the weather cleared and the fog lifted, the Rangers of the 68th Ranger Brigade showed a video of how they shot up this Russian motor convoy. Here are the shots that our Rangers showed, demonstrating how they strike. It was precisely on this road from the south of Pokrovsk, where the incursion was happening, that they destroyed these motorcycles. However, they destroyed the motorcycles without any infantry on them. So the infantry is somewhere. They dismounted, I see, got out, took up some positions already. But it's important to understand that the Russians really are infiltrating Petrovsk in large numbers. The 7th Course itself acknowledges this infiltration, saying there are about 300 occupiers, but again, that's at the level of official communication. According to my information, there are currently more occupiers there. Well, to put it mildly, it's significantly more than 300, and you can find the same information from other sources you trust, because in reality, reports indicate that the number is much higher. However, official communication currently compels them to state only these figures for now. As for the entry point, the place where the Russians are entering, until recently, it was marked as a gray zone on the Deep State map. Now they feel very much at ease there, freely passing through this intersection in their half-broken vehicles and on motorcycles toward Pokrovsk. In other words, the very fact that they are entering Pokrovsk so calmly actually disproves the entire communication narrative that this is just some isolated infiltration of the city. This is not an isolated infiltration of the city. This is already a full-fledged entry by rather large groups, numbering several dozen people. And as I have repeated before, I will repeat again. In the end, we are losing Pokrovsk. But there are positive scenarios, potentially positive scenarios that we can achieve if we at least establish a defensive line here. It is worth recognizing our paratroopers, who are actually putting up a fantastic defense here. If they are able to establish a front line here, to build it somehow and hold it, these will be simply phenomenal actions by our soldiers who at the same time, while being in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration, are taking extremely destructive blows to the head from Russian aviation. And this is a huge, gigantic problem, against which we currently have no countermeasures. Here, friends, is a video from Myrnohrad, where you can see an enemy cab strike hitting and destroying a multi-story building. It's a sad sight to witness, of course, but that's exactly how it is. As long as we don't have a solution to counter their cabs, as long as we haven't fully figured out how to counter their advanced units like Rubicon, leaving Pokrovsk is impossible. If we're being honest, that's the real trend. Setting a course for withdrawal is not an option, because otherwise the Russians would gain a much greater advantage. But building a front line, potentially with a defensive setup and open flanks to ensure logistics, is theoretically, that's a possible option, which obviously our command is now trying to implement there. That's how things stand. I just really don't want this review to turn into nothing but a digest of negative news. It's important to understand that these are all just the enemy's tactical successes. This is not a strategic success. In strategic terms, we are holding our ground. We are delivering deep strategic strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation. Right now, it is critically important for us not to fall apart as a nation. Because I understand perfectly well, and just like any citizen, like each of you, I experience these so-called Mindich-gate episodes when, something like $2 million from Ukrainian energy end up in Moscow in the hands of an agent, a traitor, Derkach, who is now a deputy in the State Duma. This pains me deeply, but on the other hand, I understand that we simply do not have the right to fall apart or collapse right now, because that would just be a defeat for our country. And most importantly, our resilience lies in how we process the news, how we perceive it, and in our attempts to counter it. For my part, I guarantee informational support for everything that contributes to our victory, including exposing corrupt officials and mere gossipers. But you, my friends, please also keep a cool head. I want to ask and urge each of you to do this. Also, please like, comment, and subscribe to us. All the best until we meet again.